A very good morning to you, students. I'm Ms. Poseidonout, and we are going to look at English as a school subject, Model 6 this morning. So you are very welcome to this content-based contact session. Let's have a look at a few of the topics in each unit that I think you should focus on for the coming examination. Please note that the exam paper is not restricted to what I'm going to talk about today, but I'm going to focus on what I feel is some of the most important facts or topics in your module. In Unit 1, I would like us to quickly focus on the sentence types that we deal with. First of all, we know we get something that is called a statement. An example, for instance, would be, clothes make the man. Naked people have little or no influence on society. The next thing that we get is our question or our interrogative sentence. But what is the difference between literature and journalism? So obviously, it is a sentence type that ends with a question mark. We also distinguish between the command or the imperative sentence. Be careful about reading health books. You may die of a misprint. Then we have the exclamation or the exclamatory sentence. To die for an idea is unquestionably noble, but how much nobler it would be if men died for ideas that were true. So I think when you look at these sentence types, you should ask yourself, do you know when each of these are used, and will you be able to identify these if they are asked in an examination? And of course also you should give consideration on how you would teach them to your students. Also in Unit 1, something I'd like you to focus on is the complex and compound sentences. Now, what is the difference between the two? A compound sentence refers to a sentence that's made up of two independent clauses. Now, an independent clause is a complete sentence, and it's connected to one another with a coordinating conjunction. Let's look at the example. I looked for Mary and Samantha at the bus station, but they arrived at the station before noon and left on the bus before I arrived. So clearly we've got two complete sentences here that have been joined. A complex sentence, on the other hand, is made up of an independent clause and one or more dependent clauses connected to it. So the dependent clause is not a sentence that can function independently. Our example, because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon, I did not see them at the station. So we see the sentence, because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon, is our dependent clause, which cannot stand alone. The next important aspect is to look at the verb, the direct object, and the indirect object in sentences. Ask yourself, do I know what is meant by each of these, and will I be able to identify these in sentences given to me? Direct objects are nouns, pronouns, clauses, and phrases, and they usually follow transitive verbs. A transitive verb is an action verb that requires something or someone to receive the action. You can identify them by asking yourself the following simple formula: subject plus verb plus who or what, and that will give you the answer, which is the direct subject. Try using the formula to determine the direct object as you consider the following examples. Dennis and Susan ate omelets for breakfast. We know that the subject is Dennis and Susan and the verb is ate. So let's ask ourselves the question, who or what about the verb ate? What did the subject Dennis and Susan eat? They ate omelets. Therefore we know our direct object is omelets. But now how would we identify our indirect objects? They are nouns or pronouns that identify to whom or for whom the action of the verb is performed, as well as who is receiving the direct object. They are seen infrequently, and in order to have an indirect object, there has to be a direct object. The indirect object typically precedes the direct object, and it is identified by asking who or what received the direct object. Let's consider the following example. Samuel sent his aunt a postcard from Martha's Vineyard. Samuel is the subject and sent is the verb. Now ask yourself the question, sent what? A postcard is the direct object, and to determine the indirect object, ask who received the direct object. And in this case, the answer is his aunt, so thus we will know the indirect object is his aunt. That brings us to Unit 2, and in Unit 2 our focus today is on adverbial phrases. An adverb phrase is simply two or more words that act as an adverb. That's of course why we call it a phrase. It can modify a verb, an adverb, or an adjective, and it can tell you how, where, why, or when. Thus, we distinguish between different types of adverbial phrases. The first one is our adverbial phrase of time, which tells us when something happens or how often it happens. Like, I'll do it in a minute. If it's an adverbial phrase of place, it states where something happens. For example, I used to work in a fire hydrant factory. You couldn't park anywhere near the place. Then the adverbial phrase of manner tells us how something is done. For example, he would always talk with a nationalistic tone. Next, phrases and clauses. It's very important that you know what the difference between the two is. And it's simple if you can remember that a phrase is a group of words without a subject-verb component that is used in a single part of speech. For instance, best friend. In this case, the phrase acts as a noun. If we have needing help, in this case, the phrase acts as an adjective. On the other hand, a clause is a group of words containing a subject and a verb. An independent clause is called a simple sentence. It can stand on its own. Our examples, for instance, she is hungry or I am feeling well today. But if we have a dependent clause, we know it cannot stand on its own. It needs an independent clause to complete the sentence. These dependent clauses often begin with words such as although, since, if, when, and because. Examples of dependent clauses are although she is hungry, whoever is hungry, because I am feeling well. And you can clearly see that these clauses cannot function or give us meaning if they are used on their own. Let's have a look at what adverb clauses are. They are a group or groups of words that function as an adverb. They modify verbs, adverbs, and adjectives by telling when, where, why, how much, and under what condition. They begin with a subordinating conjunction, for example, after, if, because, and although, and they contain a subject and a predicate. Let's look at our examples. Whether you like it or not, you have got to go to bed now. She likes the red car more than her husband does. If you pay your bills, you will have a good credit score. Unless you run fast, you will miss the bus. So carefully consider these words in bold and see whether you understand why we say that they are adverb clauses. The last example, you must keep practicing until you get it right. Once again, if you would like to read more in addition to the information in your study guide, you are welcome to refer to the link that is shown on this specific slide. Our next topic in our next unit is that of prepositions. Now, a preposition is a word that links a noun, a pronoun, or a noun phrase to some other part of the sentence. There are some interesting rules that we might remember when we deal with prepositions. In general, first of all, it is permissible to end a sentence with a preposition. Of course, there are certain requirements that you need to look out for. A preposition is followed by a noun, but a preposition is never followed by a verb. It is permissible to begin a sentence with a preposition or a prepositional phrase, but you need to be careful when you use it as such. A prepositional phrase always begins with a preposition and ends with a noun or pronoun called the object of the preposition. The subject of the sentence can never be part of a prepositional phrase, and a verb can also never be part of a prepositional phrase. Our next topic, as we did in the previous module, we once again want to have a look at direct and indirect speech. Now, we know that if it's the direct words of the speaker, then it's word for word that we report the words, and you will have these words in quotation marks. But when we report it, we are going to remove the quotation marks, and it is called indirect or reported speech. So let's have a look at what should change if we change direct words to the reported speech. We don't use quotation marks to enclose it, as we said before, and we don't have to report it word for word. Very important is that the tense usually changes. Why? Because we are usually talking about a time in the past, because the person spoke these words in the past. The verbs, therefore, also need to be in the past. As a rule, when you report something, you have to go back one tense. So in our example that we had, our tense on the left changes to our tense on the right. She says it's cold changes to she said it was cold. So in other words, if it's a present tense, it will become a past tense in the indirect speech. But then similarly, if it would have been a past tense, you would change it to a past perfect tense. That is what we mean if we say when we report, you need to go back a tense in the reported speech. Also important, you should be very aware if there are words which show time or place, that we need to change them as well. If the reported sentence contains an expression of time, you must change it to fit the time you are reporting. For example, you need to change words like year and yesterday if they have different meanings at the time and place of reporting. If you have the words today's lesson is on presentations and tomorrow you want to report what has been said, you would say she said yesterday's lesson was on presentations. But if you report these same words in a time that we are not sure whether it was the previous day or that it was yesterday the words were said, you would change today to that day. So you would have said, she said that day's lesson was on presentations. In the study guide, there's a list which shows you how time words change and how words that show place as well, how they should change when you take them to the reported speech. The last thing that changes is the pronoun. If I say the directs were, she said, I teach English online, you would report it obviously by saying she said she teaches English online. We move over to Unit 4. Of particular importance here is figurative language. Figurative language is found in poetry, where the writing appeals to the reader's senses. It helps you to look at the world differently, and it can heighten the senses. It compares two things in a way that you find the comparison interesting or even a little bit surprising. There are several categories of figurative language which you should familiarize yourself with. Those are imagery, similes, metaphors, alliteration, personification, onomatopoeia, as well as the hyperbole. If I say that you need to familiarize yourself with this, I mean that you would be able to define these, but that you would also be able to identify and explain them in poems and in literature in general. You are using figurative language anytime you compare two things. When writing goes beyond the actual meaning of words, then the reader gains new insights into the objects or subjects in the work. In Unit 5, and these are also literary devices or figures of speech, I want us to focus on sarcasm and irony specifically, because there's a very subtle difference between the two. Yet it's important that we take note of the difference. Sarcasm is a subcategory of irony. That's the first thing you need to know, and it will make a lot of sense when you understand this. Basically, anything said or done or event that occurs which goes against expectations is sarcasm or irony. But let's see how it differs. If I, for instance, set fire to a haystack and the wind blows the cinders onto my neighbor's house and sets his house on fire instead, then I didn't expect that to happen, so it's very ironic. It could be even further, or I could even deepen the irony with another level by saying that I was burning the haystack because I thought it was a fire hazard to our houses, and then ironically I actually caused a bigger fire. Irony can be verbal, situational, or dramatic, any one of those three. Dramatic irony is is a technique that is often used by playwrights in which the audience knows a certain fact but the characters don't. But it can also be applied to real life, though it is a stronger tool in literary texts. Now we look at what sarcasm is. It's similar in that you are saying something that goes against expectations, but the two key differences are: sarcasm is only verbal, so it's only the words you use that can be sarcastic, whereas we said that irony can refer to a situation or can be used in a dramatic way. And in the second case, sarcasm is designed as an attack against someone. So whereas irony is innocent or can be innocent, sarcasm is used with the intent to mock or to hurt somebody. Dramatic irony is a kind of irony in a situation which writers frequently employ in their works. However, it differs from situational irony, in which both characters and the audience are fully unaware of the implications of real situations. Dramatic irony develops when the characters act to show their ignorance of a situation which the audience is aware of. An example to make this clearer to you: when we think of Romeo and Juliet, we know long before the characters themselves that they were both going to die. In real life circumstances, irony can be either comical, bitter, or sometimes even unbearably offensive. This brings us to Unit 6. And in Unit 6, there's a very interesting literary device that I'd like to discuss, and that is the hyperbole, and specifically how it's used in literary text. It's derived from the Greek word meaning overcasting, and it involves exaggeration of ideas for the sake of emphasis. The hyperbole is an outrageous exaggeration that emphasizes a point, and it can be ridiculous or it can be funny. It can be added to fiction to add color or depth to a character. Let's look at these interesting examples. You snore louder than a freight train. It is a slow town. I spent a couple of weeks there one day. She is so dumb, she thinks Kentucky Fried Chicken is chicken which comes from Kentucky in the USA. Or the last example, I had to walk 15 miles to school in the snow, uphill. In our daily conversations, we use the hyperbole to emphasize for amusing effect. However, if we use it in literature, it usually has serious implications. By using the hyperbole, the writer or poet makes common human feelings remarkable and intense, to such an extent that they are no longer ordinary. In literature, we use the hyperbole to develop contrasts. When one thing is described with an overstatement and the other thing is presented normally, we can develop a striking contrast. This technique is employed to catch the reader's attention. Another interesting device that's used in literature is the euphemism. A euphemism is used to express a mild, indirect or vague term to substitute for a harsh, blunt or offensive term. So what is the function of using euphemisms? It can be to amuse, while it can also be to give positive appearance to negative events, but it can also be used to mislead entirely. Let's have a look at examples of euphemisms. Going to the other side or passed away, used for when somebody dies. Saying correctional facility instead of jail. We can say that somebody has departed instead of saying died, or we can refer to someone as differently abled instead of saying that he or she is handicapped or disabled. And a final example, saying pregnancy termination instead of just saying abortion. In Unit 7, some other literary devices which I want to urge you to make sure that you know these definitions and also how to identify them in text, also what the use of each of them are. Let's quickly look at their definitions. The allusion is when a text reference incorporates or responds to an earlier piece, and it can include literature, art, music, film, or any other events. The hyperbole we've already discussed in detail, so I'm not going to refer to that again. The same with irony, but at the bottom of the screen, look at personification. Personification is the use of a person to represent a concept, a quality, or an object. We also know that personification is when we take something, a non-living thing, and we give it living characteristics. We also have the metaphor, which is a figure of speech that refers to one thing by another in order to identify similarities between the two. Metonymy, which is a figure of speech that substitutes one aspect or attribute for the whole itself. Example, referring to a woman as a skirt or to the sea as the deep. By using this device, you not only evoke a specific tone, but you also comment on the importance of the specific element that is doing the substituting. Parody is a narrative work or writing style that mocks or mimics another genre or work. Typically, parodies exaggerate and emphasize elements from the original work in order to ridicule, comment on, or to criticize their message. Then if we look at the simile, we know that it's a figure of speech that compares two people, objects and elements or concepts, and we will find the use of the words like or as in this comparison. This brings us to our last unit, Unit 8, where I'd like to highlight the concept of puns. Now, what is a pun? A pun is a joke that exploits the different possible meaning of words, or the fact that there are words which sound alike but have totally different meanings. I want you to consider these examples and then ask yourself, why are these puns used? Where in the sentence does the pun lie, and how would you explain the fact that these are actually humorous statements because of the puns that are used? A horse is a very stable animal. Okay, maybe you've said to yourself, yes, the word stable is where the pun lies. The next one, an elephant's opinion carries a lot of weight. I think that one's crystal clear. We focus on carries a lot of weight. Then we have a diet slogan. Are you going the wrong way? And clearly we see the word way, which also could have been spelled W-A-Y. So it's the play in words between the different meanings of way, E-I-G-H, and W-A-Y. The last one, I work as a baker because I knead the dough. Once again, we have a word knead that could have been spelled in two different ways and has two different meanings, but is used here in a very, very interesting way. If you would like to read a bit more on puns, it's quite interesting. I've also provided you with a link that you can refer to on the internet. People, that brings us to the end of the presentation. I really hope that it has been useful, and as I always do at the end of a presentation, I caution you to keep in mind your action verbs. Also, that while you prepare, while you study for the examination and you consider all the content, always think about it, be critical about what you are learning, ask yourself questions of how it can be applied in practice, and then I think you are sure to have success. You are very welcome to contact me. Please send me an SMS rather than calling me. I'll always call you back, even if it's not right at that very exact time. I suggest that you SMS your subject code to me, because then I know which subject I need to refer to and I'll be able to help you more effectively. If you have access to emails, that's also a very suitable way of contacting me, and then I can reply or I can help you in greater detail. Thank you very much for your time today, students, and all the best of luck for the coming examination. Thank you.